Welcome to the slot I look forward to most of the week, the wonderful noon slot on a Friday. And this week we are truly thrilled to be joined by the wonderful poet, short story writer, novelist, even author of a self-help book. She's even translated some children's book from Swedish. But I think to everybody, Sophie Hannah is best known as Sunday Times, New York Times best-selling writer of crime fiction. She's published in a eye-watering 49 languages and 51 territories. It may well be more by the end of this hour, you never know. And her books have sold millions of copies worldwide. In 2014, Sophie added another strand to her already very successful and busy career. With the blessing of the Agatha Christie family and estate, she published a new Hercule Poirot novel, a continuation novel, the Monogram Murders, which was a bestseller in more than 15 countries. There have been two more Poirot novels since then, Closed Casket and The Mystery of Three Quarters, instant bestsellers as well. She's also a very successful poet, and there's one of my favorite poems by Sophie is about the joy of things being cancelled, and it's something that whenever anybody cancels lunch with me or something, I say don't worry, and I email them the poem, and it's great. Well, luckily she hasn't cancelled today; she is with us. I think there's going to be a lot for Sam and Sophie to talk about, because in addition to everything I've just mentioned, Sophie is also set up and is the course director of a master's degree at Cambridge University in crime and thriller writing. And she's also launched her own creative writing coaching program with the really inspiring name of Dream Author. So I'm going to sit back, enjoy the next 45 minutes, pop back in with some killer questions. But over to you, Sam and Sophie, and I'm really excited about this.
Hi, thanks so much, Simon. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to bring Sophie in now. We've got a bit of jiggling to do because I'm in charge of the... There we go. You should be coming through just in 1 second, Sophie. There we go. We're at magic. I'm in charge of the technology here.
Hi, everyone.
So it's great. We've got a whole bunch of people already joining us. And I have an echo for reasons.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's not only me that can hear. There is an echo.
Why do we have an echo? Okay. I don't know why that's happening. I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to come out and go back in again. So if you just sit tight for 1 second, and I will vanish and I will come back, I hope. Actually, do you know something? I'll bring Simon in just for a second while I go out and come back in again. Simon, can I just bring you in while I get rid of this echo? Hang on. There we go. There we go. Oh, we can't hear him at all. He's got the sound off. There's no sound. There's no sound.
Okay, well, I tell you what, while we're fixing the echo, I will say one thing, which is I have a fourth Poirot novel that's just come out, which, Simon, you might not know about. So there are now 4 in total, and the latest is called The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. Oh, the echo's gone. Yeah. So I just thought I'd say that. There are actually 4, not 3. And since Simon mentioned my poem about cancellations and the joy of things being cancelled, I will just mention that in order for the joy of cancellations to work properly, it has to be that you don't cancel the thing. Because if you cancel the thing, then you feel guilty that you've let everyone down. The best kind of cancellation is when you are totally prepared to do the thing and planning to do it, and then just at the last minute, somebody else cancels and you get all that time back. So those are the criteria for a good cancellation.
That's excellent. How are we now? I think that's better sound, isn't it?
Perfect. Yes.
Magic, the magic of technology. Sorry, we lost Simon's sound completely. Having brought him in, and we couldn't actually hear him. So just sometimes this is a fantastic platform, and it's a great opportunity for us to be able to talk in completely different locations. But every now and again, something goes wrong, and usually there's a few things at the same time. So that was brilliant. So Killings at Kingfisher Hall, I have to say, I have just finished. It's fantastic. And the Poirot novels are amazing. They really are. I think I saw something I want to talk to you about, stepping into character. as somebody else's character. But let's just take you right back to being a poet and then becoming a thriller writer, because that is a big changeover. And Little Face was your first book, wasn't it, in 2006? So just tell us a little bit about that sort of transition.
Well, so I didn't really think of it as a transition. I didn't have a sort of transitional moment because as a kid, as quite a young kid, I had always loved rhyming metrical poetry and mystery stories, those two things. And I'd always written both. And so what happened was I just got published as a poet before I got published as a crime writer. But I was already writing mystery stories. It was just that they weren't very good. And it took me much longer to sort of realize what was wrong with my mystery writing as a teenager and how to make it better. And it just was a sort of long, slow process. Whereas with the poetry, I kind of found my ideal poetry voice just earlier. So then what happened was when I was published as a poet, and my poetry really kind of took off, like I was immediately sort of noticed and invited to read at lots of festivals, and my poetry books sold really well compared to almost all other poetry books. So that success was so noticeable. And meanwhile, my crime fiction attempts were being rejected. I just thought, well, why don't I focus on the one that's going well? That seemed a sensible thing to do. And I was quite happy just being a poet. Everything was going brilliantly. But then when I had my first baby, I was in hospital and had some experiences and thoughts that gave me what I thought was a brilliant idea for a psychological thriller. And that was what became Little Face. And I basically thought, this is weird, because I had decided I'm a poet and I'm not going to pursue this novel thing. But now I've had this amazing idea and I could see it being a great psychological thriller. I thought I'll just have one last try. And if this doesn't work, then I'll go back to being a poet. But it did work, and I've been writing crime fiction ever since.
It's fascinating. I think it's really, really useful for everybody listening, because we're on the writing.ie Facebook page and our YouTube channel at the moment. And a lot of the people who are watching are aspiring writers. And for them to hear about you, who are so incredibly successful now, that you had a few false starts with the thrillers. I think you mentioned the other day there was maybe 2 or 3 books that were in the drawer, so to speak. And I think that's it's very encouraging.
Oh, and I mean, actually, I don't even think of them as false starts. Obviously, at the time, I was upset when those books were rejected, but I was also completely unable to see what was wrong with them. And it was only by going through that process of having book after book rejected that I was able to feel that disappointment, then kind of get analytical and think, okay, what am I doing wrong? How can I fix it? And so without those failures, without writing all those books that were not good enough, I would never have been able to get to the point where I was able to write a good one. And this is one of the key things that I teach in my Dream Author program. That the tendency is when you get a rejection, obviously you're upset, that goes without saying, and you're disappointed. But in addition to that, writers tend to think something has gone wrong. I sent this book off hoping it would be accepted. What happened was it got rejected. Therefore, something has gone wrong. And what this means is maybe I'll never succeed. And that whole side of it is not true. So yes, you're upset. Yes, you got the result you did not want to get. But rather than thinking something's gone wrong, what we should all in fact be thinking is, this is perfect in order to get me to where I need to be and where I want to be. So every failure, every rejection is an opportunity to change the strategy, improve your writing, and still pursue that same goal. And one of the main things I teach in Dream Author is that once we start to think about failures and disappointments in the right way, we can cut by half the suffering that we experience. And I didn't know all this when I was trying to because even Little Face, when I'd written this book, I thought, this is amazing. This is such a great book. I really thought it was great. But I didn't have an agent at that point. Oh, no, I had an agent who hated the book, the idea, everything. But I just kept believing in it because I was so sure there was something in it. So I tried approaching other agents and I just pursued it. But at the time, I was kind of so upset and worried by every rejection, because I made them mean in my mind I might never succeed. Whereas now, if I get a failure or a rejection, which I still do, like even the most successful writers have regular failures and disappointments. If that happens now, there's almost no suffering at all. I just go, okay, that wasn't the result I wanted. I still am totally going to get the result I want somehow. What's the new strategy? And so that's why I created my Dream Author program, because I wanted to save other writers all the unnecessary suffering that I created for myself. And I wanted to be able to share with people all the techniques and tips and tools that will maximize their chances of having a long and happy and successful writing life.
I think that's absolute. I mean, it's genius there, bottled, because it's that attitude and seeing it as an opportunity and learning and improving, isn't it? I was exactly the same in my books, and by the time I wrote Little Bones, which was my first book, first published book, I'd written 5 before, but I would never have been able to write Little Bones. And sounds similar. You'd never be able to write Little Face if you hadn't gone through that process along the way. So, and I think that's one thing, it's very hard for people to understand, that because we learn English in school and we might have done degrees and whatever, that we tend to think that we can just sit down and write a book. But actually there's that apprenticeship, isn't it? There's that learning process and learning the techniques and things that you need to sort of find along the way.
And the failure is like such a necessary part of the success. I mean, the way I like to look at it is, by the time I was 20, I would say I'd had at least 40 rejections from publishers. At least, maybe 60, but let's say 40, right? By the time I was 20. All my close friends, every single one of them, had had 0 rejection letters from publishers. So you could look at that and go, I'm doing so much worse on the getting published front than all my friends. My dog.
Don't worry.
When the postman comes. So you could look at it like that, but actually it was those 40 rejection letters that were ideally putting me in a position to then create the success I needed to create.
Little Face, yeah, it's fascinating. I think that your process is just incredible. And then obviously you were successful with your own thrillers. And tell us a little bit. I love the story about how you were invited to write the Agatha Christie books, because that's just such an enormous thing to be able to take on the mantle of one of the world's absolute top-selling authors. Tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Well, it came about because of a weird coincidence. So I was an Agatha Christie super fan, had been since I was 12, but it would never have occurred to me that I could or should write a continuation novel featuring Poirot. It would just never have occurred to me in a million years. And I just would have always carried on reading and rereading Poirot, and I would never have thought to write him. And then my agent, my literary agent, rang me one night and said, I was in HarperCollins's offices today, I was in this meeting, and I suggested to them that they should commission you to write a new Poirot novel. I was like, what? You never ran this past me.
Thanks for checking.
Yeah. Anyway, so he just suggested it because he remembered that I was a big Agatha fan and that she was published by HarperCollins, and he just made it up off the top of his head and suggested it. Anyway, the editor to whom he made the suggestion said, absolutely no way, the family would never allow anyone else to write a book.
Absolutely.
And I was like, yeah, well, I could have told you that would be the answer. I wish you'd checked with me before suggesting it. Anyway, the next day, my agent rang again and said, this is really weird, but the Christie family want to meet you. And I was like, what? How has this happened? And it turned out that the HarperCollins editor, the very next day after his meeting with my agent, had met with the Christie family, and they had said, this is going to surprise you after all these years, but we have decided now's the time for a new book.
Wow, that was meant to be.
The editor then said, well, I had a weird agent in my office who suggested these, and it all just went from there. So like total serendipity and a coincidence of timing.
It's wonderful, isn't it? And I think that it's that little bit of luck and that little bit of opportunity when the things come together, that it's amazing, isn't it, how that can happen when you look back at things. And it's often the little, but it's opening the doors. You know, if he hadn't said it, the door would never have been opened. You know, would never. Yeah. So it's fantastic. It's really great to hear. So you write two types of books. You write obviously the Agatha Christie's, the Hercule Poirot novels. I'll give a quick flash. We've dropped the links into the comments, guys. So for those of you who are interested in picking those up, you can just literally click on the link. There's the cover again. It's a gorgeous cover on that one. But you also write your own thriller series. And so talk to me just a little bit about your process, because this is where it gets really interesting for people, about how you write a book, basically. Sophie Hannah, we need all your secrets now. Fire away.
I will talk about that, but I should point out that I mean, the way I think of it is I write loads of different kinds of books. So I do write Poirots. I do write a series of contemporary crime novels featuring Detective Constable Simon Waterhouse and Sergeant Charlie Zayler and their colleagues. So those are kind of my main two areas, but I also have written quite a few standalone crime novels. My latest contemporary novel, Haven't They Grown, is a standalone.
Yeah.
Doesn't feature Simon and Charlie. I also write self-help books. I've written a self-help book called How to Hold a Grudge, which is all about... I'm
going to show them the covers quickly. So that's Haven't They Grown, which is the standalone.
Yeah.
And then we'll get rid of that. And then we'll just show you how to get... I love this. This is just a genius, brilliant book.
Yeah, that's the hardback cover. The paperback cover is white with lots of cactus on it.
That's lovely.
And I've got a new self-help book coming out next week called Happiness, a Mystery.
Oh,
66 attempts to solve it. So that's another strand of my writing, the sort of self-help strand. And I've written a supernatural thriller called The Orphan Choir. So I think
goodness, non-stop.
Yeah,
literally.
The Orphan Choir is actually one of my favourites of my books because it's probably the only one that actually terrified me. And I tried to give it a slightly happier ending, and the editor said, no, don't do that just because you're scared of the other ending. But I did the really scary. So I just sort of think of myself now as someone who can write any kind of book, which is really interesting because then I just get to choose, what do I want to do next? And I know there's this, and some of you, if you're writers, you might have had this already said to you, or you might have come across this. When you're starting your writing career, one of the bits of advice that is often given is stick to one thing and establish a brand. And, you know, like, obviously, if you want to do that, then that is a thing that can work and can work brilliantly. But another thing I teach in Dream Author is any bit of advice anyone gives you, I mean, including the advice I give you, and anything that anyone ever presents to you as a fact, like, so the fact is that it's hard enough being an author, but if you don't stick to a brand and a genre, it's even harder. All of those bits of advice people give you are what I call in Dream Author story deals. They're offering you a story deal, and in their mind that it's just the truth. They're just telling you what's true, but it never is just objectively true. It's always just their opinion. So if I was starting out now, I would do exactly what I did when I was starting out, which is I just wrote the books I decided I wanted to write. So after I'd written and published Little Face, the thing I most wanted to do in the whole world was just write more psychological thrillers with Simon and Charlie in them. And so that was what I did. And that was all I did for about 10 years. But then the minute I decided, actually, I want to write a supernatural thriller now, or I want to write a standalone, I just decided it was fine. Now, people did say to me, oh, hang on a minute, that's not what you're known for. And especially with the Grudge book, there was quite a lot of, well, why don't you just write another crime novel? You're not a self-help writer. And in those kind of situations, we writers can very easily go, oh, am I about to make a terrible mistake and do something wrong? And we just don't need to do that. We can go, let me explain. Writing this different kind of book is exactly what I should be doing because it's what I really want to do, and it's all going to be fine, and it's all going to work well. So, like, I always encourage my dream authors, as I call them, to kind of like not just react and respond to other people's expectations or the publishing world's expectations, but to go in with some firm and committed expectations of your own based on what you want, because otherwise, as a new writer, it's so easy to be buffeted about by other people's opinions.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Do you think you've got a different readership for all of those books, or do you find that there's crossover between your fans? Is it Sophie Hannah voice they love and that they will follow you anywhere?
I guess there's both really. So like there's massive crossover. There are many of my readers just read everything. Poirot, psychological thrillers, Grudge book, whatever I produce.
Yeah.
And there are also groups who just read one or so like there are some readers who just read my Poirot novels. There are some who just read my contemporary crime novels because they say, oh, we don't like Agatha Christie. And, obviously I don't understand anyone not like Agatha Christie, but
each their own.
so I would say it's a mixture. In terms of my writing process, and again, this is this is something I teach in Dream Author. I always start, well, the idea for any book always comes to me with a kind of very short idea. It's either an idea for the beginning, intriguing mystery, intriguing plot hook, where I just kind of think, oh, if I picked up a book with that hook, I would have to know the answer.
Yeah.
Or it'll be an idea for what I think of as a brilliant ending. So, for example, in my second Poirot novel, Closed Casket, the idea I had that I loved, and it was the first component of the book that occurred to me, was a motive for murder. And I was like, I love that motive. I was absolutely convinced it was the best motive for murder ever. Like, ever. I don't know how good the book is. I think it's quite good, but that motive, I challenge anyone to. It's just the best, right? So I started with that, and then I worked backwards. So
it's sort of reverse engineered from there.
Yeah. So I start with either my beginning idea, my ending idea. Then the next thing I do is kind of nothing for a while. I just let more ideas come and attach themselves to the first idea. And when I think I've got enough of a sense of what the book might be, then the next thing I do is write the blurb. And I find this super useful because, like, I think it's quite rare. I don't think many people approach it in this way. But what I love about that is, like, before I've even written a word of the book, I kind of fast forward in time to when the book is about to be published. And I think, what blurb, if it was just up to me, what blurb would I want on the cover?
I think that's incredibly useful, isn't it? I mean,
well,
certainly.
It's a way of sharpening your mind and your mission statement and your intentions around what you want to do. So you might have all these ideas knocking around, but when you're forced to write a blurb, well, not forced, but when you decide to set yourself the task of writing a blurb, what happens is your mind kind of goes, okay, a blurb is effectively a story promise. My 2 paragraphs of blurb is my only chance to say to readers, if you read this book, this is what you will get.
And that's a key word, isn't it? Promise, I think, is a really key word in there. I like that a lot.
I think of it as the story promise. And once you've crafted that story promise in the form of a blurb, it really helps to sharpen your mind to know what the book's main mission is supposed to be. So, for example, Haven't They Grown, the one that you showed the cover of before?
Yeah, we'll bring that back so people can see that. It's in the links in the comments too, so people can find it.
Yes. Yeah, so that book starts with Beth, the protagonist. She sees her ex-best friend, Flora. She hasn't seen her for 12 years. The friendship ended abruptly. But she's basically spying on Flora's new house because she's got this kind of weird obsession. Oh, the echo has come back.
Yeah, the echo's come back. Don't worry. I don't know if they can hear it. Guys, in the comments, pop in the comments if the echo's bothering you. No, I think we're okay. You just keep going. I think you're okay, Sophie.
Oh, it's gone now. It's gone again.
Weird. A ghostly echo. It's your orphan girl.
So, so she hasn't seen Flora for 12 years since their friendship abruptly ended. And she's kind of parked outside Flora's house, spying on the house, and Flora's car pulls up and she goes in through the gates, opens the door, gets out of the car, and Beth, the heroine, sees her and thinks, oh yeah, there she is, 12 years older, but definitely still her. And then Flora opens the back door of the car and says, come on, Thomas, come on, Emily, out you get. And Beth thinks to herself, why is she talking to her kids as though they're still 3 and 5 years old? Come on. They must be great big galumphing teenagers now. And then as Beth watches, 5-year-old Thomas and 3-year-old Emily get out of the car and they look exactly the same as they did 12 years ago.
That's a terrifying premise.
Terrifying. And obviously Beth isn't a fool. She knows this is literally impossible. And yet she also knows that she sees
Mm.
this, they're wearing the same clothes that they were wearing when she last saw them 12 years ago. Now, when I wrote the blurb for that, which I wrote before I wrote any of the rest of the book, the blurb, I can't remember exactly the whole blurb, but the ending, the last few lines of the blurb say effectively what it says on the cover there. 12 years have passed. The children don't look a day older. Why haven't they grown? The story promise that blurb is making, and it's so obvious, it's almost ridiculous to say it, but the story promise is, if you read this book, you will find out why these
What the
children
answer
apparently
is.
haven't grown.
Yeah.
You will get, you will first get a really baffling mystery where the apparently impossible seems to be happening. And you will probably be frustrated and desperate to know, because how can this be happening? And then, I promise you, you will find out what's going on. So that's what my blurb does. And with crime novel blurbs, that's kind of easy to do. It's like when the body of X, Y, or Z is found in a particular setting, everyone wonders, might it be his wife, Esmeralda? But how can it be when Esmeralda has been dead herself for 20 years? ... There's the story promise.
There you go.
Will
There's
find
another
out.
one.
Yeah. So I find that super useful as a way to start. And then
It's
what I
brilliant.
do next,
It's your gnocchi technique.
my gnocchi. Yes. Now,
You need to hear about this. Very
yes.
important.
And again, this is something I teach in Dream Author, and it's really interesting because of my many Dream Author members, I would say 80% of them, when they learn how to do the gnocchi method, they go, oh my God, this is it. Game changer. I'm doing this forever. And they love it, and it works brilliantly for them as it does for me. And the other 20% go, I just don't want to do this. It's not that it doesn't work, it's just I don't want to do it. Planning,
Their way of thinking.
detail, never going to work.
Yeah.
The reason I call it a gnocchi plan is that just like gnocchi is equal parts potato and pasta, a gnocchi draft, as I call it, is equal parts a detailed plan of your novel and a first draft of your novel. And it's because of the detail of the plan that I only realized this once I was doing it over and over again, and I just thought of it as a detailed plan of my novel. And then I realized that it was in fact so detailed and so edited and polished and assembled by the time I'd finished with it, that it was effectively, and to all intents and purposes, a first draft, which meant that when I came to write the next draft, huge amounts of time saved. Now, let me just tell you about the other brilliant thing about the gnocchi draft method. Generally, even if we're experienced, much published writers, when we sit down to start our novel, it's day one, you've been thinking about it, you've maybe made some notes, you've maybe done a mind map, but there always has to be a day one when you sit down and think, I'm starting my novel. And at that point in your novel, in your head, there's this kind of vague but also definite idea of this perfect novel you're going to write as soon as you start. Then you start, and even before you've started, you've got that dread, like, now I'm starting, what if it all goes
It's like
wrong?
paralysis that comes with the blank page.
Terrible feelings emerge, right?
We're all very familiar.
You start, you steel yourself and you start, and within a paragraph you're like, well, I've ruined it already, this is all terrible. Like, my perfect book is already ruined. And that kind of pressure of, I am now writing my book, makes it much harder for you to write from the right psychological and emotional energy. Whereas, if you get to effectively write your first draft in the form of a gnocchi plan, and if you get to say to yourself, this isn't the novel, this is not me writing the novel, this is just me planning the novel, then you don't have that feeling of, I'm spoiling it already just by writing a sentence.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really useful. I know Alex Marwood does something similar. She writes what she calls the stuff, and she can write 40,000 words of the stuff, which isn't the novel. So you haven't got that, which is exactly what you're saying, the pressure of starting the book. Because if you're writing the stuff or you're writing the plan, you're not writing the book. And I think
that's really interesting. I didn't know she did that. And it's possible that the stuff is exactly the same as the gnocchi. Like, if I chatted to her about it, we might be like, we're doing exactly the same.
You'll have to ask her. But it's fascinating.
what it means for your novel is it's brilliant news for your novel or your non-fiction book, indeed, because I do the same with my non-fiction books. What it means is you get to create so much more of your book, and you get to experience so much more of the creative process fueled by the good, positive, still believing in the ideal end.
This can still be brilliant.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And then when you sit down to write the second draft, which I now, first, second draft, depending on whether you think of the gnocchi as a draft or not, when you sit down to write that version, you don't have that same dread and that sense that you could ruin it all, because it already exists.
And you've got
you have to kind of experience that to see how well it works.
You've got to the end, you know what happens, all those key things are in place. I think it's fascinating. I think it's a brilliant way of doing it. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about character before you start your gnocchi draft? How do you, because obviously you've got your plot in place, because that's key to that working.
Sometimes the gnocchi drafting process is me working out the plot. So when I start a gnocchi, I definitely don't know all the plot, but I know enough that I can make a start. By the time I've got a fully revised, edited gnocchi and I'm ready to start the actual book, then I've got obviously all the plot in place and everything to do with character, because my approach to characterization is a plot first approach. So when writers are asked which is more important to you, plot or character, they always say character. Apart from Geoffrey Deaver, he says plot, but literally every other writer I've ever heard ask this question, they say character. Now, I think the reason they do this is because many of us in the literary community have just imbibed from the literary ether the idea that if you're a proper writer, you should care more about character, that caring about plot is somehow unworthy. And so much of what we believe is just what everyone else around us seems to believe. And I think people don't really question this. But my view is, and I mean, I desperately care about all the people in my books. And I think that the psychological human side of any book is easily as important as the plot. But my approach to character is a plot first approach. And by that, what I mean is I start with the story. I start with, like, what's the first incident that happens? So in the case of Haven't They Grown, it's Beth seeing the children who apparently haven't grown. Or if it's my first idea is for an ending, then I will think to myself, right, here I've got the final plot point. And then I think, okay, well, if that's the final plot point, or if that's the first plot point, what needs to happen immediately after? Or what would I like to happen immediately after? What would I like to happen immediately before? Once I start to see what plot points I would ideally like to include, then I think, okay, in order for this plot to be feasible, or this plot event to be feasible, what sort of person am I going to need to make it work? So, for example, in Haven't They Grown, if Beth was the kind of person who, and there are plenty of people like this, guys, I don't understand them at all, but there are plenty of people who see a weird and inexplicable and mysterious thing, think to themselves, that's a bit weird, and then go off and think about something else and don't pursue it and don't invest. To me, that's baffling, right? But then there are other people like me who, when they encounter a mysterious and puzzling set of events, they think, I will not rest until I've solved this mystery. So there we go. From that initial plot point, I knew exactly what Beth had to be like as a person. So that's one way it works for me. But the other thing that I passionately believe is, and again, here I'm going to offer you a story deal, which you can disagree with, but I believe it. I don't think character is a thing. That I think people are real. And so in your book, you are for sure going to want to have people. But character, in the way we think about it, I think that is a completely made up notion. What you have is human protagonists or human beings in your work in progress, and they are going to be behaving in certain ways, and they're going to be thinking in certain ways and feeling certain emotions. All of that is true, but that doesn't mean there is a fixed thing called character. And if we imagine there is and we try to create a character, we're going to end up with something much more kind of consistent and ossified than we ideally want. So, yes, people, of course, have behavioral patterns and tendencies, but we don't have fixed characters. And so one thing that often happens in fiction is we meet these protagonists whose behavior is all totally consistent with what the author has decided they're, what kind of person the author has decided they are. Now, actually, any kind of person can decide to change the way they think at any time, and suddenly their behavior will be unrecognizable, because it's not this thing called character that creates our behaviors in the world. It's just our thoughts at any given time. So that the reason I like to have a plot first approach to character as well is that plot is real and definite and tangible. It's the stuff that happens. Character, I don't believe, is real.
It's fascinating. I mean, that's really turning a lot of things on their head, isn't it? From the perspective of I suppose crime writing and a lot of writing advice. How does that work in terms of? I'm going to just bring in the Agatha Christie book again, so we can remember the cover. How does that work when you are taking on somebody else's characters? Are you still working very much the plot-driven approach, but you know that you've got Hercule with all his, you managed to, well, you're not managed, you just brilliantly, he just is fantastic on the page. He jumps out at you and he's hilarious. So you've completely taken him on in every way. How does that work? Did he interfere with plots?
That's a brilliant question, and I've never been asked that before in relation to my plot and character philosophy. So that is actually a great question. So I regard Poirot as someone who exists in the world, and he is. I mean, he may be a fictional character, but he exists in the world. We all know who he is, right? As an Agatha fan who's read the Poirot novels countless times, even before I started writing Poirot novels, I'd read them all at least 4 times. So I feel like I know him. And what I decided to do was, and by know him, what that means is I have thoughts and beliefs about him. When I started to write the first Poirot novel, I decided to create a new sidekick for him, who is Inspector Edward Catchpool of Scotland Yard. And I thought, Catchpool, as my invented character, he's a new person writing about Poirot, because he's the narrator of all the books I've written about Poirot. So he's a new person thinking and writing about Poirot. And so he is kind of the representative of me in the book. And so everything that you read in my Poirot novels, it's not that Poirot has a fixed character that I put in my books. What it is I've created this protagonist, Edward Catchpool, and what the reader then has access to is Catchpool's thoughts about Poirot. Now, because Poirot's behaviour is consistent in my books with how he behaves in Agatha's books most of the time, Catchpool is able to think, oh, Poirot is, doing his neat and tidy thing again, because he is. That's how Poirot is behaving. But so the short answer is I use exactly the same approach, and it's an approach that involves knowing that there is no such thing as character outside of our thoughts. Now, of course, we all have thoughts about what kind of people are. Like, I might think, oh, Barbara over there, she's generous, she's generous with money, but she's very neurotic about germs, or, whatever. I might think she's this kind of character, he's that kind of character. And we all do that. And that really helps to bring our people to life in our books, because we can show what all the people are thinking about each other. And it still doesn't mean that character is a real or fixed thing. And actually, that's one of the great things about Poirot as Agatha created him. His behavior is totally both consistent and inconsistent. So all the things we know him for, like his obsession with order and method, his kind of dapper way of dressing, and how important he thinks clothes are, all of that, we see those behaviors over and over again. So we go, oh yeah, that's what he's like, that's what he does. But also, Agatha included in many of her novels about him episodes where he does not behave in accordance with his normal character. And in the Agatha fan community, people sometimes draw attention to this and say, yeah, it didn't quite work that she made him do this, because that's not really
upset.
She must have done it for a sort of plot expediency reason. But actually, I think that makes the so-called characterization of Poirot work even more effectively, because in real life, we all in fact do have moments where we act out of character, and fiction can and should reflect that.
It's fascinating. It's really it's interesting. I think the character of Catchpole, using him as your window on Poirot, is absolutely genius, because then you're taking Agatha's character, but you're absolutely making it your own, aren't you? Because Catchpole obviously wasn't hers. So you're bringing him in to use him as your sort of your funnel, if you like, your window on the world. We've had loads and loads of questions, so I think I'm going to bring Simon in so we can deal with some of those. We'll chat to you more as well, Sophie. If that's good with you, Simon, because I know I can see them streaming down the side, and obviously I'm listening to you, so let me bring him in, and he's been keeping an eye on those.
Down the side
you can see them.
Yes.
Hang on.
But I'll let Simon present them to
Can
me.
you hear me?
Indeed. So we'll do it between us.
I can hear you.
God, I was just sitting there thinking, this is just pure gold. So thank you.
Isn't it?
I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
There are, I mean, you've got about 4 proposals of marriage. 3 people want you to go on holiday with them and sit next to them, you know. So, you know, when Laura lies, you know, anywhere you want to go, there's probably someone here who is, people saying they're absolutely gripped, and this is fantastic. So, and I think what's fantastic, you know, we've done a number of these interviews, but actually every week there is a light bulb moment, and I think this gnocchi idea is, it's really caught fire here. So a couple of people have asked me, how long is the gnocchi version? Is it like kind of 40,000 words, or is it?
Well, it can be any length. I mean, what determines when you've got a finished gnocchi is not how long it is. It's, have you put into the plan every detail that you want and need to include in the book? So is it comprehensive? And if you've got a very short and simple book, then obviously the gnocchi will be shorter. A typical gnocchi for one of my Poirot novels is about 100 pages. And it contains every single thing that's going to be in the book. And if I were to fall under a bus before I wrote the book, it could be given to another writer and they could write the book. Obviously, they'd write it differently, but they could write it. There's also different ways of doing gnocchi. So you can do... So what I use as an example in my Dream Author program is a really sort of beautifully written gnocchi plan, where I've written as well and clearly as possible a description of each chapter. So it's not in note form. It's like, some might say, chapter 1, Poirot is returning from a lunch when an angry woman accosts him and says, and so it's like literally a description of every scene in the novel. But the reason I did that in that way is because I was going to be presenting it to the Christie family when it was ready. So I wrote it as a document to be read and enjoyed. Now, with my psychological thrillers, I don't always write out my gnocchi in that descriptive way. I sometimes do it in note form. So I will include as many bullet points as I need to of everything that needs to happen in that chapter and in what order. In fact, I will just say, because people are very taken with the idea of the gnocchi, and as soon as I mention it, everyone goes, but like, how can I find out more about that? If anyone would like me to send them a complete gnocchi draft, I'm very happy to send not only the gnocchi draft, but also the Dream Author podcast episode. In Dream Author, there's a private podcast only available to members, but I'm very willing to send out that episode and the Monday mission exercise and my gnocchi draft of a Poirot novel to anyone who would like to receive it. So if you would like to receive it, all you have to do is send me an email, sophie@sophiehannah.com, and just put gnocchi in the subject line. You don't have to say please or thank you, just literally gnocchi in the subject line, sophie@sophiehannah.com, and I will send you all the gnocchi info.
Grand. And we'll put that in the comments too. I have somebody, we've got Maria at the other end, who's my partner in, we have an organisation actually called Writers Inc., which is a bit similar to your Dream Author, which is a Facebook writers group. She's on here putting in the link, so she's going to put in your Dream Author link and the email address and everything, so people can pick up on that, because these broadcasts get watched. We've lost Simon here, he's come back now. These broadcasts get watched by about 2,000 people eventually, so there's plenty of them.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I tell you
and
what, I will also, as well as the gnocchi draft, anyone who sends me an email with gnocchi in the heading, I'm also going to send you my 2 podcast episodes from the Dream Author program about how to approach agents, because approaching agents is something that everyone wants to know about.
absolutely.
And there's lots and lots of information out there about how to do it. And all the information out there
I'd love to read that.
is
Yeah.
Simon and I have done one too.
out there is helpful and good, and it says some clearly obvious things like, you know, don't tell the agent that if they don't take you on, you'll murder their family, you know, all the sort of obvious stuff. But what none of them do is talk about the mindset and the psychology and the emotional, the emotions that fuel your writing to an agent, and how absolutely crucial it is to understand all that before approaching an agent. So based on the comments that I'm seeing, I bet lots of people would probably want to
that'd be really
agent
useful.
stuff as well.
It's always good to get that. Simon and I did a series as part of these videos as well, called Everything You Ever Want to Know About Publishing But Never Dared Ask. So it's packed full. I think it's hugely interesting, and it really helps people understand how that whole world works. Simon, can you see anything else? Any other questions that have come up? I think what's really interesting for me is how many words do you write a day, Sophie, and how long are your drafts? I mean, just you mentioned 100 pages there.
My drafts of like when I write the full novel, it's usually between, I mean, if it's a Poirot, it's usually 80 to 90,000 words. If it's not a Poirot, it's usually 90 to 100,000 words. But every book is different. But I mean, I kind of choose, and it's just a personal choice. Other people may disagree, but for me, a book has to make a pretty strong case if it wants to be longer than 100,000 words. And I always start with the premise of there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to tell this story brilliantly in 100,000 words or less. Now, that's totally kind of random and spurious, but just as a reader, there are almost no very long books that I think need to be as long as they are. The exception is the complete works of Tana French. And her books are long, and they need to be long, and I would hate it if they were even a word shorter. She's just about the only person I feel that way about.
They're fantastic books, absolutely. I think every story has its natural length, doesn't it? So, Simon, what can you see coming through our comments there? Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Simon? Are you? No, I think we've lost.
I think
we lost your sound.
Susan. Hold on, let's see.
Yeah, no, I think we've lost his sound. We will see. I did see a really good one here about what was it? Do you know the answer before you start writing? So did you know the answer? I think that's a question from Sally about whether you knew when you started writing, haven't they grown? Did you know the reason why the children hadn't grown?
Yes. So when
I
started writing the gnocchi, I knew. When I started writing the blurb, I knew. But when I first had the idea, I didn't know.
Okay.
I only really start putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard when I know that there's a viable ending. Now, I am a big fan of structure and balance in writing. Oh, the echo.
The echo's come back, I know. Oh, Simon, can you hear?
Let's go.
Can we hear you?
Can you hear me or not?
Oh, we can now. Yeah, we've got you anyway. So if we've got an echo out.
There's a terrible echo. Never mind. Sophie, I just wanted to ask you that the moment that you sat down to write the first line of the first Hercule Poirot novel, did it feel like you were kind of bringing something back to life? Was it like sort of animating a national monument?
I mean, it felt really exciting, but I never thought of Poirot or Agatha's work as not being fully alive. Like, people are reading Agatha Christie all the time, and I'm one of those people, so I didn't feel that I was kind of unearthing or restoring a lost thing, because I never thought of it as lost. Yeah. Let me try and say what I was.
Just keep going. I don't think they can hear the echo. I think it's just us.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, good. All right. Okay, that's why I'm talking in a weird way now because of the echo, but just ignore me. Okay, what I was going to say about structure and balance is, because the idea for Haven't They Grown was so high concept, high octane, like it's a real ambitious premise.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to stop you. So they can hear the echo.
They can hear.
So what will we do? Oh, that's
There.
better. I think it's Simon's. I think it's Simon's sound somehow is causing the.
Okay, that's
It's
much
gone
better
now.
without that
It's
echo.
gone.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
So-
keep going. Sorry, keep going.
I believe that the ending of a book should somehow match and balance out the beginning, so that if the beginning and the end were on a seesaw, they'd be even, and one wouldn't be like that and one like that. And what I mean by that is, if the driving mystery in your mystery novel is, for example, who killed George? There are 5 suspects. George is dead. Has to be one of these 5 who killed George. Which one was it? They each had a reason why they might have done. For that kind of premise, it's totally acceptable for the solution and the denouement and the payoff to be, actually, it was Mary who killed George for this reason. That's absolutely fine. But for a premise like Haven't They Grown, which is so outlandish, so over the top, so high octane, I knew that I needed an ending that was kind of big and wow, and like that it would balance out that very ambitious beginning. And so I'll always think a lot about structure and balance within each book. And so because of that, and because I always like to start with a premise that makes people go, I have to read that book right now. I always like to go for the really high concept.
Yeah.
I know that coming up with a solution to the mystery that's going to be as amazing is going to be a challenge. So I don't like to commit to any blurbing or gnocchiing or writing until I know that I've got that amazing solution waiting to be brought in. With Haven't They Grown, for ages I didn't have a brilliant solution. I had a kind of perfectly adequate solution. And I remember I was having a curry with my mum and I was saying, I'm just not happy with the solution. Let me tell you, this is the mystery. This is what it turns out to be. I just don't think it's good enough. And she, because she's my mum, she just thinks everything I do is wonderful. So she was like, it's brilliant. Oh, it's fine. It's brilliant. And hearing her say that made me even more sure that it wasn't good enough. I was like, no, thanks for the encouragement, but you are in fact wrong. It's not good enough.
Your mum is always a different person to discuss with.
And as soon as I gave myself permission to actually face the facts and admit to myself that I was never going to like that ending enough, the new ending occurred to me. It was like seconds. I was like, oh, wait, but what if it was that? And so what I've actually done is included the perfectly adequate explanation towards the end, and then everyone kind of goes, is it that? And then actually, oh no, it's something much more terrifying and amazing.
Ooh,
so I used both, but I kept the best one for the end. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I love the idea of the balance between the beginning and the end. I think that's something that actually we don't really think about.
No, we really, and it really
that's
shows.
interesting.
I mean, I can think of one famous crime novel that I read, and I was absolutely loving it. It was so good throughout. And the solution at the end, it wasn't that it didn't work. It wasn't that it was implausible, but it was just a lower level of solution than the initial premise and all the writing and the characterization and everything. It was like the ending of an okay book tacked onto the beginning and middle of a brilliant book. And so that just ruined the whole book.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. The whole process is just, I think we could get you back for another hour, Sophie, to be honest, to get drill into it. It's so interesting. And I think it's because you have the contrast of so many different styles, and obviously a creative mind, which is just producing ideas constantly. Do you find that you get, when you're thinking about a new book, do you find that there's a few different ideas and then you latch onto one, or do they come individually?
They do come individually initially. But then once I sort of bring one to the front, like there's always lots of book ideas that I could write. I've got like a file called book ideas on my computer.
Yeah.
Every time I'm about to write a new book, I have to choose which one to prioritize and write next.
Yeah.
So once I've chosen that one, I literally kind of put it in a room in my imagination. I leave the door open and I say, right, other ideas, come and join this one. And gradually I start to notice that the ideas are arriving. And then once there are enough that have attached themselves to the initial idea, then I know I can start with the blurb and then the gnocchi and then finally writing the book.
Excellent. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Simon, can we hear you? Do you want to just say something and we'll see if we can hear you?
Yeah, somebody's asked a good question. Is do you ever sleep?
That's a very good question.
I do sleep, and I actually sleep very well, and maybe not quite enough, but no, I sleep well. What has happened though, and again, this is another thing I teach in Dream Author, I have learned to manage my time and energy so much more efficiently and better by using certain specific techniques. So when people say to me, how on earth do you get everything done that you get done? I'm kind of like, yeah, I totally get why you're asking that, because me 15 years ago could not have done that. If someone had said to me 15 years ago, how do you fancy writing a book a year and running a coaching program and teaching a master's and running a podcast about how to hold a grudge, I'd have been like, there's no way I can do one of those things and none of the others. And that's never true, right? That just like all our limiting beliefs about ourselves, they're never true. They're never true, but we imagine they are. And so what I've done is decide on purpose to think differently about what I can achieve, which anybody can do. And in Dream Author, I teach you how to do it. But I've also applied some very concrete principles to how I arrange my time. And I've saved myself so many hours of frustration by doing that.
Having a good plan. Yeah. I think there's also that thing about, you give a busy person a job and they'll get it done, because I would imagine you're somebody who when you need to do something, you do it rather than
always
wander around and think about it for 6 weeks.
But I also do things like when I'm doing my weekly schedule, I schedule in my relaxation time, my free time, my socializing time, family time, sleep time. I schedule that all in first. I also teach in Dream Author a method of giving up to-do lists forever. Most people have a to-do list and think they need one. And of course, we need to know what we need to do, but the best way to achieve that is not via a to-do list. So that's another whole component.
The whole secret there.
Program. Yeah.
Actually, Maria, who's going in with our comments here, who runs Writers Inc. with me, has that exact same attitude about scheduling in her leisure time before she schedules in her business time. She's another lady who's is extremely busy. So and there's people downloading the books and as we speak. So you're selling Kindle literally on certainly.
I hope you enjoy them.
It's great news. Really, really, really good. We are nearly at our end of time. Simon, is there anything else that you want to ask?
I mean, I have to ask you if who would you choose to write a Sophie Hannah continuation novel?
That's a brilliant question.
Do you know, I would probably choose my two children. I have a daughter who is 17.
Brilliant.
A son who is 16. And I'm always thinking of brilliant, inspiring ways to motivate them to do stuff. As you can imagine,
Indeed.
They love this and always appreciate it.
I bet they love it, yeah.
But I would love the idea of sitting them down and going, hey guys, I've got an amazing project for you. And they'd both be like, oh, I don't want to do that. Can I have some money instead? But in an ideal world.
Well, I think it's been, there are so many takeaways from this. And I think we're all now ripping. Everyone's going off to get a recipe for gnocchi. They're going to send you an email. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I'm sorry we've had a few problems. It's been really fantastic.
That's fascinating. It's nearly not long enough, is it? We'll have to get you back again, Sophie, if you're up for that.
Definitely, yeah. And if anyone's watching this video, because I know you said people are going to be watching it later.
Yeah, afterwards. Yeah, they will do.
If you are someone who's watching this video 3 months or a year after we recorded it, and if you think, is Sophie still going to be willing to email me all the gnocchi draft and the agent stuff? Yes, I will be. So excellent. You can email me even if this is a year later than when we recorded it.
That's brilliant, and all the
Wonderful.
information's in the comments, so that people will be able to pick up all the details and the links and the email address and everything from that. So that's fantastic.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's
Thank you.
brilliant. Now, and thank you very much indeed, Simon Trewin, for joining us. That is another writing game wrapped up there. So we're going to sign off now very, very quickly, but thank you very much indeed, Sophie Hannah. The Killings at Kingfisher Hall is out now, and haven't they grown too? Simon, go on, fire away.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you very soon.
Indeed. See you soon. Thanks.